Meeple Nation Podcast, episode 432. Who done it in these three murder games?
Welcome, citizens of Meeple Nation. For the next 30 minutes, sit back and enjoy.
Meeple Nation is brought to you by GameToppersLLC.com. If you haven't checked them out, you're missing out. There's so much in your game table that can be elevated by a trip to their website. From their mats to their toppers to the toppers of the toppers. There's great things going on this website, and the quality of stuff that you get for your game table is amazing. You should seriously check them out. GameToppersLLC.com.
Welcome to Meeple Nation. We are your hosts. I am Andy Holliday.
I'm Nathan Howard.
And I'm Logan Howard.
We are missing Dave tonight. We'll hopefully have him back next week. If you want to see more of Dave, even though he's not here, you can jump on our website and check out his bio. All of us have bios. We also have bios of each of our bloggers. Speaking of blogs, we have blogs on our website. Jump over to our blog page and see the four of us have blogs, plus we have some regular bloggers that write blogs for us and different topics, lots of interesting stuff and different takes on things. Check those out. We also have photos and links to all of our episodes. We also have a link to our Patreon page. We appreciate any support you can give us. We love what we do, and if you love what we do, we appreciate any support. We appreciate those that have already jumped onto Patreon and chose to support us. We hope to try to improve what we're doing, make the quality of our episodes better, and to overall give you a better listening experience. If you have any questions or comments, just want to say hello, email us at meeplenation@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you.
It's totally something I have not done at night, was go to our website to look at your guys' bios while I catch up on some episodes.
You should. I've read all of your bios, by the way.
I think it's a great opportunity to kind of get to know each of us a little bit different and kind of our points of view and maybe a little bit about where we came from.
I actually find it super interesting sometimes how the blogs go in like groups of themes without even the intention of doing it. Oh, this is what I'm going to do with my next blog, and somebody else like, oh, that's what I'm doing too. And it's just weird how that just happens sometimes.
And then sometimes they inspire them. Kit did a blog all about buying a new game and having limited shelf space, which inspired me to, oh, well, when I moved, that was a whole big transition. How do you transport games and how do you resort your game collection? It's kind of nice. These kind of feed off of each other and inspire each other, inspire some discussions and some communications. This week we are continuing our discussion of games that include murder. This week we are going to discuss 3 different games, expand on each of those a little bit. Talked a little bit about some of them last week, hopefully not too much because we're going to go into them a little bit deeper this time. So let's go ahead and start with you, Logan.
Mine is a Hasbro classic, Clue. It is the classic whodunit. What you need to discover is who committed the crime, with what, and where. A deduction game, it's a process of elimination. You start knowing some of the information, but you have to explore the house, trying to discover the other rooms and what they have before the other players come up with it. I've had great memories growing up and playing this game, and coming into the hobby as an adult, you can definitely see some of the inspiration for some of these murder games coming off of games like Clue. Classic deduction of process. Like we were talking about Mysteries of the Abbey last week. I have this amount of information and I need to find the rest. I'm trying to be the first one who does it and make it back to the... But I mean, it's a race to be the first one to get all the deductions to solve that crime. And it is a classic for a reason because a lot of games have been based off of Clue.
You know, it's really interesting, there's so many games out there. There's so many games out there that it is very rare to come up with a new, unique game mechanic. Every game that comes out has elements that are based on existing games. Like we talked last week with Mystery of the Abbey, where we compared it with combining Clue and Guess Who.
But it's combining those two and adding new elements.
Right, yeah. I mean, it's not just a... boom, here's these 2 mechanics. And that's what has been nice with the hobby is designers have taken these mechanics, implemented them in a different game, in a different feeling, done some unique twists on them to try to make each game unique. And sometimes there's games that come out that are similar, like you have The Thing Infection at Outpost 31 and The Thing, the board game. which are very similar games. They each have their unique differences, but they're very, very similar at the core of the game. Compared in the past many times, Shadows over Camelot versus Battlestar Galactica. And I guess now we can include Unfathomable in that same category. Still, all these games are similar, but there's differences. They're pieced together in a different way. Like Frankenstein's monster, we take some of this elements, take some of that element, try to make a new creation. Clue has been a game that's been around since 1949. This is one of those core games. The Hasbro edition and Parker Brothers original games kicked out a lot of those early mechanics.
And it's also just one of those games that even if people haven't played a lot of board games, there's almost a guarantee they had a copy of this game in their house at one point.
Yeah, it's not as popular as Monopoly.
But they had a copy of Monopoly, they had a copy of Risk, Clue. These are like one of the main 4 or 5 board games that pretty much everybody grew up playing at some point.
I always enjoyed it as a kid. Clue was a great game that when I was young, I always enjoyed. You had the little dagger that was there. It was back when you had the pewter pieces in there. There was a candlestick, the wrench, the rope. As a kid, this is a game that I always enjoyed when my family would play game night. Few rare memories that I'll have playing a game with my dad. He and I used to always play Husker Du. Husker Du was a game back from 1970 where you pull up a chip and then you're trying to match the shape that is under the chip.
So when I was growing up, we called that game Memory.
It's similar to Memory. Husker Du's been around since the 70s, and it's a game that's still out there. It's more of a younger aged game. They charted it as a 4+, 4 years old and up game. That was one that played several times with my dad. Fond memories of that. Anyways, I digress. Back to you, Logan. Tell us more about Clue.
They came out with Master Detective Clue when I was a kid, which added more people, more contents, more rooms, more weapons. Made the whole deduction a little more difficult than the base game of Clue, which I thought was fun.
Yeah, that would be great. Master Detective Clue.
That's a copy I have, too.
I actually ended up buying Master Detective. Must have been when I guess I don't consider that the first real board game I purchased, but it probably was. I always consider Hero Quest or Dragon Quest my first real game because it was one of those family games that we already had a copy of Clue and really enjoyed it. I was probably 12 when I bought Master Detective, but I played the daylights out of that game. I had to bribe my sister with anything possible that I could to get her to play. I think she still resents me for that. It was more blackmail than it was really bribing.
There's a slight difference between those two words. They have different definitions.
Yeah, I may or may not be responsible for her dislike of games because of
some encouragement to play Clue with you.
Yeah, there was definitely blackmail involved. I'm trying to cure her of that now that we're both adults and we've played some games, and she's like, "Oh yeah, that was really fun actually." When you're not being blackmailed, it's playing of your own free will. It can be enjoyable.
Clue Master Detective came out in 1988. Increased the play count from 2 to 6 to 3 to 10. It added a couple more rooms and a couple more people. Madame Rose added the carriage house and poison. Monsieur Brunette, trophy room, horseshoe. Introduced a couple of things to make the game
a touch more complex.
Lots of fond memories of this. You roll the die, you move your pawn, and you can't make an accusation unless you're in a room. I can't remember for sure, but I think you have to make an accusation including the room. You have to be in the room.
You have to be in the room, but you can pull any weapon you want in the room.
And any other player.
And any other pawn can be pulled into that room.
So if the murder was in the kitchen, you actually had to be in the kitchen to say the murder
Correct.
was here.
One thing I always thought was cool about Clue is they had the secret passages, so you could go through the kitchen to the conservatory, different ways to get around the board, which was fairly unique for that time period. The free board movement, everything else was very linear at the time. That actually had pawns moving around the board. You think of Sorry or any of these other games where you had tokens moving around the board, it was all linear, whereas with Clue, it's almost like an open world video game versus a linear video game. You could go do whatever you wanted to do, go wherever you wanted to go. I just thought it made it more fun than a lot of the other staple board game at the time.
Clue has had a movie made out of it.
Yeah.
You can tell a lot about a person by where they know Tim Curry from. Rocky Horror Picture Show, Home Alone, Clue. Tim Curry's been in a lot of movies. Clue was a very enjoyable show also. If you want a movie night to go with your game night, and you're playing Clue or Clue Master Detective, look up Clue the movie.
And that's Clue.
So I chose a game that we have talked about a little bit previously on the podcast, and that is Mysterium. In Mysterium, you have been summoned to a mansion to solve a 30-year-old murder. Murder was deemed an accident, yet you have received a letter indicating that that may not necessarily be the case. Each of you are going to play a psychic. Well, rather, each of you but one person is going to play one of the psychics, is going to come and try to communicate with the ghost to try to solve this murder and see who done it. The other player is actually going to play the role of the ghost. The first time I played this game, I played as the ghost and thoroughly enjoyed playing as the ghost. I've played it other times as both the ghost and one of the psychics. I think I prefer playing the ghost. It's so much fun.
But I think I prefer playing the ghost. I feel a little bit more involved. Although I don't have anything against playing one of the psychics either. The diversity in the way you play the game is great, where it's all through art.
The way it works is the ghost can't verbally communicate. It's been too long since he's been murdered. He can't really communicate with the psychic, so he can only send images to them. As Nathan mentioned, you have a bunch of cards similar to Dixit, cards with just honestly really strange artwork on it. First thing you're trying to get each of the psychics to do is each of them are going to have a different person that they need to try to decipher, the person that the ghost is trying to tell them. The ghost is going to give them clues. They can give them up to 7 cards. Those cards are laid out face up, and all the psychics get to collaborate and try to help decipher exactly which person that pertains to. Cards that will be laid out showing the people they need to see exactly who the ghost is trying to point the finger at. You can try to be matching colors. You can try to be matching symbols. Part of the trick of being the ghost is to try to understand exactly how each individual thinks at the table. That can be challenging at times.
That can be very challenging. And it's also equally challenging for the players to decide what is the ghost thinking.
For sure.
Sometimes the ghost trying to understand how I think, so he's giving me cards how I think, and I'm like, what would this mean for Andy and how he thinks? Thinking of the opposite thing. Andy likes colors, and so I'm going off of the colors that he gives me, where he's like, no, Logan likes the shapes. He likes the other images that are inside the image.
I think there's a little bit of both that goes on. Sometimes there's something that is blatantly obvious as the ghost. You're like, oh my gosh, this is like the perfect card. And you throw it out there. It's a collaborative thing among all the psychics, right? So one person may point out, oh, well, yeah, look at this. I think it pertains to this person. As the ghost, you're sitting there thinking, I didn't even think of that.
Yeah, because
Why didn't I think of that?
You're like, oh no! Like, don't listen to him. Everybody
Yep.
else, you were doing just fine.
Yeah, that happens quite often, actually. But then there'll be other times they'll nail it. You throw that card down and it's just, oh yeah, this is obvious. This has to go with this person, or it has to go with this room. The next level up, you have to guess the room. And then the third level up, you have to guess the weapon. And like I said, each psychic will have their own individual 3 cards. And then of those sets, at the end of the game, depending on how well everybody did, now what I mean by that is you have tokens that you can put down. I give clues to Nathan. Nathan decides, I think it's this person. Everybody else at the table can put a token down to say, okay, I think Nathan's right, or I think Nathan's wrong. Depending on whether Nathan's right or wrong, the people that guessed that correctly are going to move up on the clock track. Why does that matter? Well, at the end of the game, however far you are on that track is going to determine how many clues you get to see before you have to make a decision on which set of cards actually pertain to the murderer, the room, and the weapon. And that can be huge. You're always going to get to see one clue, because the ghost at the end of the game only gets to give 3 clues. You only get to see 1 clue. If I don't have a great card for that first clue, that can be extremely difficult to try to decipher that off of 1 card. Seeing that extra cards, and if you get further up the track, then you get to see all 3 cards. The reason why that's important is in order to win the game, the majority of the psychics have to have guessed correctly which set is the actual murderer in which room and with what weapon. So in a lot of ways, it has some elements like Clue, as far as the fact that there was a murderer in a room with a weapon, and kind of like what you were saying, Nathan, where they've taken an element of an existing game like Clue and have completely switched it around to make a very unique game. A game that honestly I think is a lot of fun. My kids have really enjoyed playing it as well.
You talk about taking the elements, comparing it similar to Clue, and I think the similarity ends where all you have is a location, a person, and a weapon.
I agree. Yep, I agree 100%.
And the rest of it is all based on art. All the possible murderers have a very unique card. I believe there's 2 more cards than there are players that are out there, so that the ghost is trying to point them, each person, to a specific and unique murder suspect. Again, with the same amazing art cards, or not the same, but with the different selection of art cards, are trying to point to a room, and then that third one they're trying to point to a means of murder, all by using these very, very unique, bizarre pieces of art to try to inspire those dreams. The art, I think, is phenomenal.
It definitely is the bright spot of the game for sure, is the artwork. Some of it is absolutely crazy artwork. If this is a game that you like to play and play substantially, one thing that we have done is we've actually added Dixit cards to that stack to kind of change the artwork up a little bit. And vice versa, actually, for Dixit, you can take the Mysterium cards and change up your Dixit game a little bit. But Dixit has a lot of expansions to add a lot of artwork, so that's one thing that can be done to change things up a little bit. As the ghost, that can be difficult is you may have to give a clue to somebody and have, at least the way you feel, 0 cards that really pertain to that clue that you need to give, because you need to give each player a clue. Down to the last player, I have to give them a clue, and I've been holding off because I don't have any cards, and now I have to give them a clue. I still don't have any cards. There's a built-in mechanism to help solve that. You have crow tokens that are on top of your screen that hides secret information from the players. If you remove one of those crow markers, then you get to discard as many cards as you want and draw a fresh hand of cards.
So something that I do when I'm playing the ghost as the game is evolving, if a piece of art comes up, clearly indicates one of the sets. It's clear it's a knife, it's clear it's a pool, or it's clear it's a certain character. That's a card that I'm going to keep, and I'm going to save that as a final clue for the final round.
Yeah, I do the same.
Which can be great for that final round. However, now that just limits me to having 7 cards. I only got 6 cards.
That's if you only found 1, let alone you found 2 early in the game. I really don't want to get rid of this.
And if you find 2, yeah, that becomes even more difficult.
Not to mention the fact that you are timed in this game. So you only have 7 rounds to get everybody's sets figured out in order to enter that final round. Otherwise, you're just not able to do it and you will lose the game. Trying to get everybody progressed is super important. So only having 6 cards or holding on to that card would be a super easy way to get someone just trying to decipher the room or up to the weapon. Do you hold on to it, or do you use it now to try to get that game progressed so you actually can make sure you get to the final round?
I think it's a toss-up. You only have 7 rounds to get to the very end. But you have 7 rounds. You only have 3 levels to get through. So there is some margin for it. It's been multiple times where we've played where it's right on the wire. It took me 3 rounds to guess the room or the location or whatever. I only have 1 round to guess the weapon, so the pressure is on. At the same time, there is a little bit of leeway with that.
You know, and I think the benefit to when you give clues, you can give multiple cards. If I'm looking at colors, I can maybe focus on that color if I have 3 cards that have similar colors. I want you to focus on the color because I'm giving you 3 cards to focus on the color. Get you around holding on to that better card and focus on something a little more abstract like the color. The fact that you can give more than just 1 card can be super helpful in that aspect if you want someone to focus on a specific thing, or if maybe it's a key and you have 2 cards with keys on it. I'm going to throw those 2 cards down. I've got 2 cards that show keys. Look at the keys.
Unless they look, oh, look, there's windows. And you're like, dang it, kid, key!
Yeah, or there's a color, right? You got keys,
Yep.
but there's a red color. Oh, it's all about this red color. Mysterium is a great game. There's another one, Obscurio. Very similar, trapped in the wizard's library, and you're trying to escape from the grimoire or escape with the grimoire. I can't remember what it is. Very similar game.
Except that one introduces the traitor element where one of your fellow wizards has become entranced by the dark magic and wants to stay in the library forever.
Grimoire is what gives the clues in that game. And the player that plays the Grimoire, I think it's easier because you have little tokens, little arrow tokens that you can place on the cards and say, focus on this. I think it makes it far easier to give those clues in Obscurio than it is in Mysterium.
I agree.
Downside, only have 1 card.
Right. Being limited like that, at least you can get people to focus on what you want them to, rather than it being just free reign, 4 people throwing out ideas. In my experience, it's a little easier being the Grimoire rather than the Ghost. So that's Mysterium. I have loved this game. I think it's great. My kids have loved playing this game. We actually played this game at BGG Con. Nathan's level of frustration at the very end was made the game worth playing anyway. When Dave totally got his clue wrong at the very last round. That was fantastic.
That did make me feel good on the inside, yes. That
Wasn't that he the only one that didn't get it?
Yeah, and he was very adamant that he was right. And he was wrong. That's why I can say that Dave is not always right. He was very, very adamant that he was correct. And I was equally adamant that he was incorrect. I was justified in my frustration with Dave that game. The last game we're going to talk about is a game called PI, a Private Investigator. This is a 2 to 5 player game. This is a game that is completed in 3 consecutive mini games. In this game, there is the city board, and on the city board are 14 locations. There's Lakeside, Forest Park, Little Italy, the Trocadero, Bubbles, Pinky, Knuckles, Maurice, Earl, Rusty, Doc, Shorty, names like that. And there are 10 possible crimes that have been committed. Murder, protection racket, a mob killing, jewelry heist, etc. Each player has a set of three elements that they're trying to decipher. The location where the crime has occurred, the perpetrator committing the crime, and then the crime itself. First introduced to this game on BGA, probably where I've played the bulk of my plays. I had to look really hard to find a copy of this game, so if you're looking for this game, it's a little bit harder to find. If you pick it up, it's great, but if you can't pick it up, playing it on BGA is always an option. There's a row of cards at the top that include these elements: locations, perpetrators, and crime. So you have a couple options. The first option is you can pick one of these cards. Then the player to your left, that player is in charge of managing your 3 cards, and you are managing the players to your right. When I make a guess, okay, I think it was this card off of the open market row, and say it was the Trocadero, then if that was where the crime occurred, the player to my left is going to put out one of my discs. I'm going to put it on the Trocadero location. Each of those locations are going to have tiles on it, and these tiles are all shuffled up randomly. The locations are not shuffled up, they're just printed on the board. And then you have a tile that will include either the suspect or the crime. Since there's less suspects than there are cities, you're going to have a couple that don't have any suspects. You're going to have 2 locations that don't have any suspects, and then you're going to have 4 locations that don't have any crime. Going back, if I guess the Trocadero, then the player to my left says, that's it. They're going to put the little disc on the Trocadero. However, if that wasn't the location, then the player to the left is going to look at the adjacent locations to the Trocadero. In the case of the Trocadero, it has 6 locations that are around it. If the crime took place in one of those 6 places that are adjacent to the Trocadero, then that player is going to put a cube in that location. Cube indicates that that location is not the crime, but one of the spaces touching it is where the crime is. You can do the same thing with the suspects and the crime itself. The other option is you can place an investigator token. Each player has 5 investigator tokens. These investigator tokens can be put on a location. Me as the active player, I'm going to put investigator token on the Trocadero. And now the player to my left is going to look at the Trocadero, and then they're going to look at the suspects, and then finally they're going to look at the crime. If the crime, the suspect, or the location is correct, then they're going to put a circle, but they're not going to put a circle indicating which is correct. They're just going to put a circle at that location. By some happen chance, all 3 of those are related to my crime, meaning it's in that location or it's adjacent to that location. It's possible to have 3 markers there. So I could have a circle, 2 cubes, 3 circles. If I have 3 circles, then woohoo! That's awesome. That's very rare that that's going to happen, but it could happen. Or you're going to have 2 squares, 3 squares, that as the investigator, you try to look at clues that are in that upper row that are related or adjacent to that location so that you can narrow down that crime. Or you can get no markers on there, meaning none of those locations are related, and then all of a sudden, boom, that's eliminated a lot of information that's not related to your case.
That's actually one of the better results in my mind.
In my mind, too.
It's either, hey, you got it, awesome, or that's nothing.
If you pick the Trocadero, and then all of a sudden now you've eliminated 7 locations, 7 possible suspects, 7 possible crimes, that's huge, especially at the first of the round. As you go through the game, each player is going to try to narrow down that selection and try to narrow down those choices. First person to do it correctly is going to score 7 points in that round. For the next 3 rounds, points are going to go down. You could have 5 points, 3 points, and then if you make an incorrect guess, then you're going to score negative points. After everybody has had the appropriate time to complete it, score the points for the round, then you're going to start your second case. Begins over again, go through all the same steps. Third case, you're going to do the exact same thing. With the exception of the investigators that you use, you don't get back. Everything else you're going to get back and have the opportunity to explore and try to identify in each of the rounds. You want to balance how many of those investigators you use. You don't want to use them all up early on, but then you don't want to be stuck with a bunch at the end that you just kind of wasted them. You want to play smart. After being introduced to this game, this has become one of my top games. And I'm just seeing an advertisement here. This game is available on Prime for $219.
Wow.
Amazon. I wouldn't buy it.
You can get it in 2 days.
Yeah, you can get it in 2 days. Yeah, I wouldn't buy it from Amazon. I would wait and try to buy a secondhand copy at a local convention that does any sort of a game swap, game flea market. Be the best place to pick it up. That's PI. Great game. I very much enjoy this game.
All of our games have a lot of similarity. One thing about PI I think is very different than, let's say, Clue, for example. Trying to solve this crime, you can't just go anywhere you want. So there are cards that come out, and you need to select a card. That determines where you're going to do your investigation. I found that extremely aggravating at times when they're like, okay, I want this card, and you have it all planned out, and then everybody starts taking your stuff.
Yeah.
It's like, no!
Or it gets to be your turn, and there's nothing I want to use on there.
Nothing. Absolutely nothing you want to use.
I mean, there's a little bit of counterplay going on. You can kind of see where Nathan's investigating, so you can take those cards out, remove that option. It doesn't really help you to do that.
Yeah, unless that move is actually helping you, it's kind of a moot point at that point.
Because it's an option, but it's not a good option at all.
I've only played this twice, and let's just say my level of play hasn't hit to where I'm even paying any attention to what anybody else is doing, other than the fact that they just took the card that I wanted.
Nathan made mention when he did online, he had to create a spreadsheet to where he could eliminate people online. I had to do the exact same thing. Opened an Excel sheet on my phone, put in all the suspects, all the locations, so that way I could, okay, I've eliminated these ones. Taking notes, super helpful in this game.
I only do that for my online games. Most of those games, you're taking your turn once a day to try to reevaluate the game state every time. I played this with Monique and I can't remember who else at HugaMeepleCon. I do really well playing it online, so I guess maybe my spreadsheet's a cheating element, because when I played in person, I was like, I got no clue what's going on. Every direction I was going was completely off. The spreadsheet does help considerably. So if you have younger players, having that spreadsheet might be great to use.
Or slower players like myself.
Anyway, to maybe level that playing field. Using that spreadsheet versus my games not using that spreadsheet, there's a little bit of a difference.
We have talked about 3 games based on murder, going back to Clue, classic games, down to some newer games that are intriguing and a lot of fun to play as well. Let us know if there are any games that are murder-based games that have murder in them, I guess, that you have enjoyed playing, enjoyed at your game table, or if there's something that you like about the ones that we've talked about, let us know.
Until next time,
we'll see you out there with your magnifying glass trying to solve that murder.
As always, we want to thank you for listening.
Check out our website. We have all sorts of cool things there. Love those blogs. Get a deeper look into the writing side of Meeple Nation.
Join our Facebook group, Meeple Nation Off Air. I look forward to seeing you there.
Follow us on Twitter @Meeple Nation. We also have Instagram
under the same name. We also want to thank our sponsor, GameToppersLLC.com.
We love their product, and we have so much goodness out there.
And we also want to thank Braden Detergent for our music.
Yeah, I think it's great to get an opportunity. I think it's a great opportunity to get us to get.
Each of you but one person is going to play one of the psychics. My goodness.
Sidekicks?
I feel like Nathan.
Who's a superhero?
Is going to play one of the psychics that
And then if you make an incorrect guess,
What sort of accent was that?
I don't know. An incorrect guess, then you're going to score negative points.